The surgical tape on my abdomen still felt tight when the man who called himself my husband flicked a $20 bill toward my shoes like he was tipping a valet. "Catch a bus," he said casually, not because we couldn't afford a ride, not because there wasn't space in the car, but because he didn't want blood, hospital smell, or baby mess anywhere near the cream leather seats of his luxury SUV. Funny thing is, the laughter he shared later that night at a 5-star restaurant would end up costing him everything he had. But before we dive into what happened next, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. And if stories like this pull you in, hit that like button and subscribe so we can keep bringing you more. Now let me take you back to the exact moment my life cracked open. That afternoon in downtown Manhattan carried the smell that always comes before a storm: wet pavement, cold air, and electricity hanging in the sky. Wind whipped through the hospital pickup area while clouds stacked darker by the minute. But the chill outside had nothing on the one creeping through my chest. I stood just outside the hospital entrance clutching a bundle of blankets. Inside those blankets was my 3-day-old son. Every small shift in my stance sent fire through my lower abdomen. The stitches from the emergency C-section pulled like fishing wire under my skin. Each breath hurt. Each step hurt. Even standing still hurt. Still, this was supposed to be one of the happiest moments in a woman's life. Going home with your baby, walking out to a proud husband waiting by the car, family smiling, arms ready to help. That's what the movies show. My reality. A duffel bag filled with dirty clothes sat at my feet. No flowers, no relatives, no husband holding the door, just me, pretending everything was fine. The nurse who wheeled me outside had already gone back in after I told her my husband was parking nearby. Truth was, I didn't want the staff seeing the truth. I didn't want their sympathy. Nothing stings worse than pity when your life is falling apart. Then headlights turned into the driveway. My heart jumped. A black luxury SUV rolled toward the curb. I recognized it immediately. My husband's pride and joy. The vehicle he insisted he needed because, according to him, a startup CEO has to maintain an image. 6 months earlier, he'd bought it like it was a trophy. Seeing that car now, I felt a small wave of relief. At least he came. At least he remembered his wife and newborn son existed. I straightened slightly despite the pain, imagining the moment he'd jump out of the driver's seat. He'd grab the bag, take the baby carefully, help me into the car, maybe even apologize for being late. The SUV stopped right in front of me, but the driver's door never opened. Instead, the passenger window slid down, and the face staring at me wasn't my husband's. It was my mother-in-law, Sharon. Her expression carried the same look she always had when dealing with me, like I was something she'd accidentally stepped in. Behind her in the back seat sat my sister-in-law, Jessica, completely absorbed in her phone. She didn't even glance up. Not at me, not at the baby. And in the driver's seat, Ethan, my husband, hands on the wheel, engine still running, looking at me the same way someone looks at a traffic cone blocking their lane. He didn't step out, didn't unlock the doors, didn't even greet me. The quiet hum of the expensive engine filled the space between us. I took a careful step closer. "Ethan," I said softly, "thank goodness you're here. My stitches are killing me." His sunglasses tilted slightly as he looked me up and down. Then his gaze shifted to the inside of the car, specifically the beige leather seats. He clicked his tongue, that annoyed sound he always made. "You planning to get in dressed like that?" For a moment I thought I heard him wrong. I glanced down at myself. A simple cotton dress. Clean. Loose enough to avoid irritating my stitches. "Ethan, it's clean," I said quietly. "Please open the door. The baby's cold." The tiny body in my arms stirred, maybe sensing the tension. Before Ethan could respond, Sharon leaned toward the window. Her voice sliced through the air like a knife. "Olivia, use your brain for once." She gestured inside the car dramatically. "Do you know how much it costs to detail this vehicle?" My throat tightened. "What does that have to do with—" "You just gave birth," she interrupted. "Hospital smell, antiseptic, blood." She wrinkled her nose. "And that baby might spit up or leak through a diaper." Jessica chimed in from the back seat without looking up from her phone. "We're heading to dinner," she said casually. "A celebration." Her eyes flicked up just long enough to give me a once-over. "If you ride with us, the whole car will smell weird." My chest tightened. "Sharon," I said slowly, "that's your grandson. And Ethan's son. Are you seriously saying we can't ride in his own father's car?" Jessica laughed softly. "Oh my God, Olivia, don't start the drama." I turned to Ethan, waiting, hoping, surely he'd say something, anything, a husband, a father, just one sentence defending us. Instead, he reached into his pocket, pulled out a crumpled bill, and flicked it out the window. The wind caught it briefly before it landed in a puddle beside my shoes. $20. "Take the bus," he said flatly. "The stop's right down the street." He shrugged. "That should cover the fare." My mind went blank. "You're joking," I whispered. "I just had surgery. I can barely walk." "You want me to carry our newborn on a crowded bus?" Sharon scoffed. "Women used to work in fields the day after childbirth." She crossed her arms. "You modern girls are just spoiled." Ethan sighed impatiently. "Just take the money and go home. We're already late. Besides, the car's full." Full. That SUV had 3 rows. There was enough room for 5 more people. But suddenly I understood something painful. The problem wasn't space in the car. The problem was space in their hearts. There wasn't any left for me. "Ethan, please," I said quietly. The pain in my abdomen pulsed harder. "It hurts." Sharon rolled her eyes. "Roll the window up," she told her son. "The humidity is ruining the air conditioning." Ethan didn't hesitate. The tinted glass slid upward, slowly, separating their world from mine. A moment later, the SUV pulled away. Its tires splashed through the puddle, sending dirty water across the hem of my dress. I stood there holding my newborn son, watching the red taillights fade into traffic. Then the sky opened. Rain started falling, first a few drops, then a downpour. People rushed past me toward their cars. Umbrellas popped open everywhere. But I stayed where I was for a moment longer. Frozen, until the hospital security guard glanced toward me. I couldn't stay there forever, so I bent down slowly, ignoring the sharp pull of my stitches. I picked up the soaked $20 bill, not because I needed the money, but because I wanted a reminder, proof of exactly how much I meant to them. I clenched it in my hand, wrapped my jacket around my baby, grabbed the duffel bag, and started walking toward the bus stop. Each step felt like knives inside my abdomen. Rain soaked through my clothes within minutes, but I only cared about shielding my son. "It's okay," I whispered to him. "Your father is cruel. But this is the last time anyone treats us like we're nothing." Because the truth was, they thought I was just Olivia, a quiet girl who got lucky marrying a rising tech entrepreneur. They had no idea who I really was. They didn't know the truth behind Ethan's company, or the money, or the connections. They had no clue that everything they enjoyed came from my family. And that afternoon in the rain, I decided it was time they found out. But what Ethan didn't realize while laughing at dinner that night was that the woman he forced onto a bus had just made a phone call that would destroy his entire world within the next 60 minutes. Rain soaked through my sleeves by the time I reached the bus stop. Cold drops slid down my neck while I tightened the hospital blanket around my son, trying to keep the wind from touching his tiny face. 3 days old, 3 days in the world, and already learning how cruel it could be. A city bus roared past the intersection, spraying dirty water across the curb. I sat slowly on the metal bench, trying not to let the stitches tear open. The pain wasn't just physical, it was something deeper. The kind of ache that forms when someone you trusted shows you exactly who they really are. And tonight, Ethan had made that painfully clear. Across town, right at that moment, he was probably stepping out of that same luxury SUV, walking into some high-end restaurant with his mother and sister, laughing, celebrating, ordering expensive wine. Meanwhile, his wife and newborn son were sitting in the rain at a bus stop. Funny how people reveal their true character when they think you have nowhere else to go. But here's the thing they didn't know. I wasn't powerless, not even close. The bus finally pulled up with a loud hiss of air brakes. The driver leaned slightly out of the window. His eyes moved from my soaked dress to the newborn in my arms. Concern immediately replaced the tired expression on his face. "You all right, ma'am?" I forced a small smile. "Yeah." Just heading home. He lowered the ramp for me even though I hadn't asked. I stepped onto the bus carefully, gripping the rail to keep my balance. Every movement reminded me my body had just gone through surgery. The driver shook his head softly. You shouldn't be out in this weather with a baby that young. I didn't answer, because explaining the truth would have taken too long. The bus ride felt endless. City lights blurred through rain-covered windows. Most passengers stayed quiet, scrolling on their phones or staring out at the storm. A young woman sitting nearby eventually leaned closer. Your baby is beautiful, she said gently. Thank you. Boy or girl? Boy, she smiled. What's his name? I hesitated for a moment. Then I looked down at the tiny face resting against my chest. Daniel, I whispered. The name felt right. Strong. Calm. A name that deserved a better beginning than this. 20 minutes later, the bus dropped us 2 blocks from the apartment Ethan and I shared. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, but the cold air cut straight through my damp clothes. I walked slowly, 1 step at a time. By the time I reached the building entrance, my hands were shaking. Not from fear, from exhaustion. Inside the apartment, everything was quiet. Too quiet. No welcome home banner. No balloons. No sign that anyone expected a newborn to live there. Just spotless marble floors and designer furniture. Ethan loved appearances. He loved things looking perfect. But perfection on the outside usually hides rot underneath. And tonight, I was finally seeing the full picture. I laid Daniel gently in the crib we had prepared months earlier. His tiny fingers curled instinctively around the edge of the blanket. Watching him breathe slowed my racing thoughts. He deserved better than this family. Better than a father who cared more about leather seats than his own child. I sat down on the edge of the bed. My body ached. My head felt heavy, but one thought kept circling my mind. They thought I needed them. That was their biggest mistake. Slowly, I reached for my phone. There were already 3 missed calls. All from the same contact. Dad. I stared at the name for a long moment before calling back. The line connected almost instantly. Olivia! His voice carried the same calm authority it always had. How did everything go? For a second, I almost lied. Almost told him everything was fine, that Ethan picked us up, that the family welcomed their grandson. But then I remembered the puddle. The $20 bill, the bus ride. No, I said quietly, it didn't go well. There was silence on the other end of the line. Then my father spoke again. What happened? I told him everything, every detail. The hospital pickup, the car window, the $20, the bus. The rain. By the time I finished, my voice had dropped to barely a whisper. But my father didn't interrupt. He listened. Carefully. When I finally stopped speaking, the silence returned. And somehow it felt heavier than before. You're home now, he asked calmly. Yes. And the baby? He's sleeping. Another pause. Then my father asked something unexpected. Olivia, does Ethan still believe the startup belongs to him? A small laugh escaped my lips. Completely. And his mother? She thinks he built everything himself. This time my father chuckled quietly. Well, he said slowly, that's about to change. Across the city, at that exact moment, Ethan was lifting a glass of expensive champagne inside one of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurants. His mother, Sharon, sat across from him, smiling proudly. Jessica scrolled through photos on her phone. To success, Sharon declared, raising her glass. To my son, the youngest tech CEO in the city. Glasses clinked. They laughed. They celebrated. But what none of them realized was that the company Ethan believed he owned, the money funding his lifestyle, the investors backing his business, all traced back to one person. My father. Back in the apartment, I rocked Daniel gently in my arms. The phone was still pressed against my ear. Dad, I said softly, what are you going to do? His answer came without hesitation. The same thing I do whenever someone forgets who built the table they're sitting at. And what's that? I asked. I removed the table. My stomach tightened slightly. Even after all these years, my father's calm voice carried a certain weight. When? I asked. There was a small pause, then he answered. Immediately. Across Manhattan, Ethan's phone buzzed on the restaurant table. He glanced down briefly, ignored it, continued laughing with his family. A minute later, it buzzed again, and again. Finally, he picked it up, The smile faded slightly. "Excuse me," he muttered, standing up. He walked a few steps away from the table and answered. "Yeah." His expression changed instantly. Confusion first, then concern, then disbelief. "Wait, what?" Across the table, Sharon watched carefully. "What's wrong?" she asked. Ethan didn't respond. He was too busy listening, too busy realizing something had just gone terribly wrong. Because while he was enjoying dinner, 3 investors had just withdrawn their funding. His primary bank had frozen company accounts, and the board of directors had scheduled an emergency meeting for the morning. Back in the quiet apartment, I watched my son sleep peacefully. The storm outside had finally stopped. City lights reflected off the wet streets below. My phone vibrated once more. A message from my father appeared. "It's begun," I exhaled slowly. Because the truth was, tonight wasn't about revenge. It was about balance. People who treat others like nothing eventually learn the price of that arrogance. And Ethan was about to learn that lesson the hard way. But the real shock didn't hit Ethan until 48 hours later, when he discovered the luxury company he bragged about owning had never belonged to him in the first place. Number continuation script, approximately 15 minutes across the city. While I sat quietly in the nursery holding my newborn son, Ethan was laughing over a glass of champagne. The restaurant was one of those upscale places where the lighting is soft, the plates are tiny, and the bill could pay someone's rent. Sharon sat proudly across from him, swirling her wine like she owned the place. "My son," she said loudly, lifting her glass, "the youngest tech CEO in Manhattan." Jessica clapped lightly while still scrolling on her phone. "To Ethan," she said without looking up. Ethan smiled. He loved these moments. The attention. The compliments. The illusion that everything around him existed because of his brilliance. But that illusion started cracking the moment his phone buzzed. At first, he ignored it. Then it buzzed again. And again. Finally, he picked it up. The smile faded from his face. He stood up slowly. "I'll be right back," he muttered. Sharon rolled her eyes. "Work again." Ethan stepped away from the table and answered the call. "Yeah," the voice on the other end spoke quickly. Serious, urgent. Ethan's forehead creased. "What do you mean the account is frozen?" He paced toward the hallway near the restrooms. "That's impossible." Another pause, then his voice got sharper. No, listen to me. We cleared compliance 2 months ago." Across the restaurant, Sharon watched him carefully. Jessica finally glanced up from her phone. "What's wrong with him?" Sharon waved dismissively. "Probably another investor wanting a meeting." But in the hallway, Ethan's calm was starting to crack. "3 investors pulled out tonight," he said into the phone. "How is that even possible?" A few seconds passed. Then Ethan went silent. "Who requested it?" The answer on the other end clearly wasn't what he expected. "Someone with influence," he repeated slowly. The call ended. Ethan stared at the phone. Something wasn't right. 3 investors walking away at the exact same time wasn't normal. That kind of move required pressure. Serious pressure. He walked back to the table, forcing a casual expression. Sharon looked up immediately. "Well, nothing," Ethan said quickly. "Just some paperwork nonsense." But his phone buzzed again before he even sat down. A message from the bank. Corporate account access temporarily restricted. His stomach tightened. Jessica leaned over the table. "You look pale." Ethan pushed his chair back. "We're leaving," Sharon frowned. "We just ordered dessert." "I said we're leaving." The tone in his voice made the waiter stop mid-step. Within minutes, they were back in the SUV driving through the city. Sharon crossed her arms. "Now explain." Ethan kept his eyes on the road. "Some investors pulled out. That's normal in business." 3 of them, Ethan said. "At the same time." Sharon didn't respond right away, and the bank froze the company accounts. Now she looked concerned. "Why? I don't know." Jessica leaned forward between the seats. "Maybe someone reported something." Ethan shook his head. "There's nothing to report." But the truth was he wasn't completely sure. Because 3 years earlier, when his company had been drowning in debt, someone unexpected had stepped in. A private investor. A silent partner. Money appeared overnight. Enough to save the business. Enough to make Ethan look like a genius. At the time, he never questioned it. He just signed the documents and kept building. But now he wondered if those signatures had given away more than he realized. The next morning started badly. Ethan arrived at his company's glass office building earlier than usual. Normally, the security guards greeted him with a friendly nod. Today, the guard looked nervous. Ethan tapped his badge against the entry scanner. The machine beeped, then flashed red. Access denied. Ethan frowned. Try again. The guard cleared his throat. Sir, we received instructions late last night. What instructions? Your access privileges have been suspended. Ethan laughed in disbelief. I'm the CEO. I understand, the guard said quietly, but the order came from the board. The board? Those words felt like a punch. Call them. They're already upstairs, the guard replied. There's an emergency meeting. Employees began arriving behind Ethan, whispering as they noticed the scene. Ethan forced a smile. Fine. He walked to the elevator, but inside his chest, something felt very wrong. The boardroom was quiet when he entered. 5 people sat around the table, investors, advisors, and one unfamiliar man in a gray suit. Ethan dropped his laptop onto the table. Let's skip the drama, he said. Why are my company accounts frozen? The unfamiliar man folded his hands calmly. Mr. Carter, please sit. I'd rather stand. Very well. The man slid a folder across the table. My name is Richard Hale. I represent the majority shareholder. Ethan blinked. The what? The majority shareholder. That's impossible, Ethan snapped. I own 60%. Richard tilted his head slightly. Did you? Ethan opened the folder. The documents inside were official. Signed, stamped, legal. His hands began shaking. Because according to those documents, he didn't own 60%. He owned 8%. The room felt suddenly smaller. That's fake, Ethan said. One investor shook his head slowly. 3 years ago, your company accepted a controlling investment. You signed the agreement. That was temporary funding, Ethan argued. Richard smiled faintly. No, Mr. Carter. That was a transfer of ownership, and the controlling shareholder has now chosen to exercise authority. Ethan's voice dropped to a whisper. Who? Richard closed the folder. You'll find out soon. At home, I was sitting by the window with Daniel sleeping in my arms when my phone buzzed. A message from my father. Phase 2 complete. I smiled softly, because Ethan was finally learning something important. The success he bragged about, the money he spent, the company he claimed to own, had never truly been his. 2 days later, the headlines started. Tech CEO under investigation. Investors question Carter Innovations. Phones rang nonstop at Ethan's office. Clients canceled contracts. Employees whispered in hallways. Reporters gathered outside the building. Sharon stormed into Ethan's apartment waving a tablet. This is sabotage, she shouted. Ethan stared at the news article. Every story mentioned the same thing. An anonymous controlling shareholder. Someone powerful enough to pull investors, freeze accounts, and trigger an investigation overnight. Who is doing this? Sharon demanded. Ethan didn't answer, because deep down, he was starting to suspect the truth. That evening, my father visited the apartment. He held Daniel carefully, smiling down at his grandson. Then he looked at me. Are you ready? For what? For Ethan to learn the truth. He handed me a document, ownership records, official, signed years ago. The controlling shareholder of Ethan's company was my father. The same man Ethan had never bothered to respect. The same man whose daughter he forced onto a bus in the rain. I looked down at Daniel. Will he lose everything? I asked quietly. My father smiled calmly. Not everything. Just everything he never earned. And somewhere across the city, Ethan sat alone in his dark office staring at the same ownership records. Finally realizing the woman he humiliated outside the hospital was the daughter of the man who owned his entire world. But Ethan's worst moment was still coming, because the next place he would see my father wasn't in a meeting room. It would be standing inside the mansion Ethan believed was his home.